legislation of the state of Connecticut allowing dispensaries in communities greater than 25,000, as well as cultivation, and I think, one more, Jeff.
Processing.
What was it?
Processing.
Processing, thank you. Those were the three areas. They are automatically, whoever the distributors are allowed to deliver into our town if they so choose, if people order it. It has to be in a container, either in the glove box or in a trunk, and it has a limit as to the amount that can be transported, but it can be delivered. And the question is, for Ridgefield, do we want a dispensary in our community? And we've had many debates, discussions about it as a board of selectmen. I'm sure ECDC with Jeffrey Morris here has talked about it a little bit, but we want to get the public input and what the feeling is here. So it's an opportunity. We can have a good back and forth if you'd like, ask any questions if people have answers that others don't. Yeah, I mean, there's only 5 of us here, 6. So why don't we get started? Jeffrey.
Has there been any interest expressed, either distributors or dispensaries, people who want to come in and open something?
Yes, I have had in my office, I don't know elsewhere, but in my office I have had one landlord that has requested the possibility of a dispensary located in one of his buildings along Route 7. As well as an individual who called me and said he would like to be licensed for a cultivation. Yes.
There's a dispensary.
Can I have your name, please?
I'm sorry. Melanie Rose, M-E-L-E-N-E, Rose, R-O-S-E.
Okay.
When you say dispensary, does that include cultivation or is that separate?
It's separate to my knowledge. You can get a license to be a dispenser, you can get a license to be a cultivator, and processing. I would imagine someone may come in and possibly ask for all 3 at the state. I don't know how they're handling that, but the licensing is all through the state of Connecticut. Yeah.
I just want to give you, I did a little research and I'd like to offer, I didn't make a lot of copies, Rudy, I only made one. I have one to refer to, I'll give it to, I believe it's Mr. Herbert? Ebert, I'm very sorry. But here for you, just this, I did some research, I tried to analyze what we all know, what everybody's talked about. I summarized, or tried to summarize the medical research and all of the scientific or peer-reviewed research, not the lobbyist-produced research. And I find almost no science article, medical article, that states anything but that marijuana, cannabis is harmful to health. I have found a few studies which I mentioned there that indicate that the legalization or providing of a dispensary in a particular location does not reduce crime. It increases the burden on the government regards to services that need to be delivered, and various other technical, I felt scientific papers that I double-checked to the best of my ability and are publicly available, which provide good reason for our town not to do this, which, as I understand it, you're free not to do it.
Correct, you can opt out.
And so I offered, and everybody, we've all heard these arguments, but I wanted to focus on the science and the medical literature. I wanted to mention, just a moment please, the 3 states that were proponents, the early proponents were 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado. They were the earliest proponents of cannabis use. And some studies have come out of those 3 states based on post-legalization. They're all negative. They all indicate further problems, greater problems, very little benefit. And so I feel that's important for you to consider. And I think this gives you a little basis to reject this in your discretion as a council. Generally, there've been a lot of research on, well, why do so many people say cannabis use is okay, it's not a problem, it lowers criminal cases, et cetera, all the reasons for the attitudes in favor of cannabis use. There have been scientific studies that have inquired as to the people who share those beliefs, and they've generally found their beliefs have been based on erroneous, false, or information that was not accurate. So that, generally speaking, there are people who are scientists have checked with the population. Why are you for, how do you know about why marijuana is good? What's your basis? And in matrixing all those people's reasons, when they focused on it, the reasons were based on erroneous information or lobbyist information, which was incorrect. So you have, I think, as of course, as the council, you have the obligation to protect your people, even when sometimes they may not be fully informed or fully guided. It's very easy to listen to teenagers and tell you, well, everybody does it. It's very easy to listen to adults who say, well, I did it in the 60s, which is really a bad argument. But if one were to look at it from a more objective point of view, I think they're a very good basis for the council to conclude at the council that you should not act and you should not create any zone for this use in town, especially on Route 7 where I live, and I have made the council aware of all the reasons why Route 7 is the poor sister of the town. We don't want to go into it, but I certainly don't want to see it over there. That's a magnet point, that's a bad point to bring such uses to. I did want to offer you another reason, a rational basis for you as the council to reject any positive legislation on this, and to question, which I believe you're entitled to, constitutionality of the Legislatives Act. What the legislature did is it said, well, we know towns have self-rule, but we're telling them they have to consider this, instituting this law. They don't have to, but if they do, they have to do it precisely this way. I regard that under the state constitution, and I cited the provisions, as an improper encroachment on town rule. And I think you should be concerned. There are limits in our state, as opposed to perhaps other states, of course other states. The towns have very powerful control and jurisdiction over the events in their borders. I think the state legislature is encroaching a bit. And I think, I can't say it's legally certain, but I provided the information. I think you can use as a basis for deciding not to do this, is that there's questionable constitutional power for the legislature to mandate you to even consider it, because you're free not to consider it. And if you do consider it, why should you buy into their scheme? They're a very unusual scheme. So I offer you that as another basis to potentially not do this. I did want to close with a few thoughts on, two sets of thoughts, three thoughts. There's in the citations I gave you, I've seen Mr. Morris before propounding, or seemed to be propounding this as being positive for the town. I'm not convinced, and I believe there is economic evidence, I cited one article, that would indicate that this as an economic benefit is not such. And the reason why Mr. Carr presented it in his part of his presentation with very good points, but essentially bad guys don't have to observe any of the rules. They can undersell any pot dealer because they don't have to comply with any rules, they don't have to photograph anybody, they don't have to do anything. So you're creating, by this unusual enfranchisement, you're creating a disparity in the market to a degree that will not cure the problem. I think it's fair to say also that a lot of the arguments for legalizing marijuana are simply sweeping things under the table. By discreating a crime, a social problem, and therefore removing it from the statistics, you're not reducing crime. You're just ignoring or sweeping one thing under an actor. I think that in a town with a very small police department, as near as I'm told, it's a 50-member department, of which about 44 are patrol officers in a 25 square mile town. I think that you have to very carefully consider public safety, the ability to cover a town, even with one of these places. There's enough of a problem, we all have heard it, I don't know who keeps the statistics, but there's enough of a drug problem in town now, there's no need to invite any other type of, we'll call it sanctioned use, sanctioned governmental use. I close with a thought that is not popular, two thoughts that are not popular, but I'm going to make them anyway. The legislature's approach was to perform social equity. That is, to impose social equity on the people of the state. And it did so by creating a special segregated class called social applicant, social equity applicant. I contend that the Constitution of the state does not permit the legislature to make such classifications, nor to give a special emolument or benefit to any such classification. In addition, I looked at the legislative record. I see nothing, although a lot of debate, and I'm sure, of course, you have the same sources that I have, but the legislative record is a record of only debate, not of fact-finding. It appears that modern American law in the country does not permit the idea of reparations or the imposition of social fault for a retroactive set of conditions, because it's beyond the power of a legislature to judge the past or take jurisdiction over time, that is, past time. It's a limitation that is perhaps a little subtle, but I think quite important. The idea of reparations to any one group and the limit of it to say, well, we'll go back in time to this and only this, is not a correct, it doesn't appear to exist in American law, and it doesn't appear to exist in American decisional law. So it's a stretch too far. And I strongly contend that approaches either on a town legislative level or a state legislative level to do what it thinks in its mind at any one time as the imposition of a liability or a punishment or a penalty or a tax on a particular group for a past action long past in history is beyond the power of the legislature to do. It can address practical problems, but it cannot make those kinds of judgments or make those impositions. It has no jurisdiction over it. Lastly, an argument that has been made quite a bit, and it kind of appears and disappears, is the comparison of drugs to gambling, marijuana to gambling. It's a fallacious comparison. First, the Indian laws were treaty laws of the United States. They were a result of a terrible misconduct of a man named Jack Abramoff, who ran a kosher deli in Washington, D.C. called Stack's, and conducted all kinds of shenanigans with federal politicians and Indian tribes at a level that is monumental if one were to look back in the history of our country. It's so bad that there's no comparison. And in this state, in fairness, any detailed inquiry into the conduct and method and the establishment of the tribes that are were less than 600 people, 800 people, and the conduct up in the northeast of our state, I think we'd all be ashamed. I think a detailed review would shame us all. Everybody forgot it now, or everybody just doesn't know it. They think that something good was done, but I urge you strongly to, when you consider the argument that, well, drugs are like gambling, they bring us money, it's fallacy. You get 3%, I think your cut is 3%. Gangsters do that. This is not the way to do business. The government is not a fee in franchising a special class to take a cut of their living. And especially when you're on the low end. Especially when the bad side is going to make it cost more. So I'm against it for, I'm going to say more intellectual reasons and truly constitutional reasons. And Mr. Marconi goes back the longest, but many members are very experienced. This has to do with the town's power to govern, how it should govern, what what method or what principles will guide it. These are steps too far. These are not correct. They won't be good for us. For any one of all the reasons I mentioned, Mr. Carr in his presentation mentioned, I haven't seen anything much really focused, but I urge you to please consider making the inquiry necessary on these more detailed subjects, because they give you the basis, the rational basis to end this. Your natural fear is going to be throw it to a referendum, which you're fully entitled to do. You forfeit your judgment when you do that. We elected, I've forgotten how many council members we had, 5 or 7? 5. We elected you because we trusted your judgment. In the case of Mr. Marconi, there's no one that knows the town, more understands the town, or has more welfare regard for the town than Mr. Marconi. You forfeited your judgment, and you're right. I'm offering you reasons, we'll call them sound reasons, to reject it without doing that. This is not a good idea to put it into a referendum, especially we have, it's a little different. The town's a little different than it was. It's not a good idea. And the tradition of this town and the history of this town is totally adverse to such a use. This town is an agrarian, Victorian, post-Civil War town, a mercantile center. This very religious, numerous churches, social order. This is not a town that would do such a thing. Everything you've done all the years of the last 30, 40 years has been against substance abuse. This is inconsistent with tradition, which you're entitled to consider, because tradition is a part, it speaks some wisdom to the present conduct of your affairs. That's all I have to say, but please don't do this.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
I think that a referendum is going to encourage debate on this topic. I mean, I kind of just came upon this meeting, earlier in the week, and I put it out on social media, and people are like, well, when's the referendum? And I feel like people are like, why are we going to debate it if there's no end game? I mean, ECDC,
I
I'm a
don't
member,
understand that if there's no end game.
meaning why debate if
If
there's not going to be, like, if they're not involved in the decision, or if the debate's not going to lead anywhere.
the referendum would be for their decision.
Exactly. So people want a referendum, is my point. And so I think if we put a referendum out there, that debates like these would become more real. And I mean, I'm on ECDC, and we started having open discussions, I think it was last July or August. And it's been really eye-opening to me. I mean, we've spoken to people in Colorado and Massachusetts, and I've visited dispensaries in Massachusetts. And it's totally eye-opening. I mean, these are very nice, high-end places. And they say there's no unsavory people hanging around. And they say there's no crime issue, because I mean, if you think about the logic, the crime comes from the illegality of it. Like, if you're going in to buy marijuana legally, you're not stealing from anybody, you're not hiding anything. So there's no crime or security issue. That comes from the illegality of it. And the economic development aspects are pretty significant in these places. I mean, the one woman who presented at our first meeting, she has 115 employees. And so just look at the amount of money that's generating.
Can you quantify that for Ridgefield? Just a rough guess, or what would you see a dispensary, gross revenues, and based on the 3% that we would get? What does that mean in your mind?
Well, I mean, the direct economic development, and if somebody's generating, $3 million in sales.
So $90,000 a year.
But, is it bringing people into town? But the other aspect is the cultivation and distribution. And those are the ones that don't have a front-facing showcase or business. So growing and distributing, and, it would be a business in town that would be hiring people and paying property taxes and filling up a vacant space. And, if it's all savory and, not bringing in bad actors and all that, I don't see a reason why not. I mean, I understand that by blessing marijuana, you're saying that it's good, rather than when it's illegal, you're saying that it's bad. But, I mean, there are many, many, many smart, educated, healthy, active people who use marijuana, and they don't end up on the street. They go to work every day, they're very productive members of society, and they just know how to use it, just like they know how to have a glass of wine at night, and they know how to use this, and they know how to exercise, they know how to do all these things that affect your way of life. And, to tell them that if they want to smoke marijuana, they have to go find some guy in the back of a park who's got a hood on to go buy it from them, why is that? And that's where the crime comes in. So, I think that, I don't have all the answers, and I'm not necessarily saying that we should go forward with this, because, we'd really need to picture what a dispensary looked like, or what a distribution center looked like, or what a cultivation center looked like. But I think that if we had a referendum and a date, that I think that these forums would be filled with people and not just have 4 people showing up at them. Because just from the Facebook posts that I put out, like, people are like, when's the referendum? Or there was a lot of debate, yes and no, this and that. And, of course, there's name calling as there is on Facebook. But, there's interest in this topic, and I think that people would like to know the economic development aspects, the safety aspects, the perception aspects. Like, I can see that point that he makes, that is that the perception that we want. And maybe it's a perception of this is a leading edge town that's sort of leading the cultural change in ways that are positive, because they're giving people the opportunity. People who may be moving out of the city are like, oh, let's go to Ridgefield. They're sort of open-minded and doing things that are welcoming. So I strongly recommend getting a referendum going, because I think it would greatly open up the debate on this topic.
Thank you. Melanie?
Yes, Melanie Rose. I have not done the research that these gentlemen have done, so I came mostly with questions.
Okay.
But part of what they've said has piqued some comments on my part. My interest in this mostly started a year ago. I think there was a letter to the editor about the time the legislature was voting on it, and from a man in Colorado. And it really piqued my interest because he was not complimentary about what's happened in Colorado since it was legalized there. And most of his comments were about the changes made in marijuana so that it's more powerful, stronger than it was when we were in college. And some of the problems that have come from that. And also that it seems to be run by a few small corporations, so that it has not been the promise for small businesses. And that's mostly what I remember reading from his comments, and so I thought, well, this is something that I think needs to be considered greater. Of course, then after that, the legislature did approve it. But I think the concern of this is not the marijuana that we, well, some of us
You're right.
experienced
Years ago.
and so it is a different conversation because of the, it's a different plant. It's, So how it will affect our youth, how it will affect our town, I think that's a real concern. And it is still illegal federally. So I think that's a real concern too. To the address of this gentleman on having a dispensary on Route 7, I thoroughly agree that there should not be a dispensary where it's going to adversely affect that part of town for many reasons. One of them, though, is the traffic. If any of you have seen the traffic that comes and goes from the vaping shops in Danbury, it's considerable. There's a vaping shop in the area where Camomile's Natural Health Food Stores is, which I frequent. And since the vaping shop has gone in there, the traffic that comes and goes from that shopping center is much greater than it was before. So I think that would be of terrific concern for the Route 7 area. And my other concern is about the growing of the marijuana. Part of Ridgefield's garden, one of Ridgefield's garden clubs, one of the things that we're focusing on is how to get people to be more cognizant of improving our planet for our future by having more native plants, and to kind of expand on that, if there are corporations coming in and growing marijuana, what sort of farmland are they taking over? That might not affect Ridgefield very much, but it certainly would affect other parts of Connecticut. That rather than growing food or native plants, then they would convert it over to growing this high potency marijuana, and that very concerns me also. So I have a lot more questions than I have.
Yeah,
any
I don't know
answers?
if we're prepared to answer any of those. Bob may have answers, I have a few.
I have all the answers.
Okay. But it's a public hearing for us to take in the information. I've written everything down. And I'll certainly do some research to come back. Our next public hearing is on next Saturday, and then on April 2nd as well, and we'll make a greater effort to get the public awareness out there. But Mr. Carr, would you like to speak? You haven't had an opportunity to speak yet.
Well, I came really to video, but I will say I'm disappointed in the turnout today, not only of the public, but also of the Board of Selectmen. I don't see anybody but yours truly videoing, so I don't know how the Board of Selectmen is going to be brought up to,
The minutes,
well, but you know that the minutes.
they're not verbatim.
Right, so I'm not really sure the town is taking this very seriously. I mean, it's to me a sign of some apathy, which I hope in the next two meetings, you do have more people who come and express themselves, and I hope more of the Board of Selectmen are here to listen, and at some point I will give you a fuller presentation. If you haven't seen it, there is one up on YouTube. I hope you have seen it. It's about 20 minutes long. Some people have responded to it saying they think it's biased. Well, it does represent a point of view, and I will try to present that point of view in more detail at one of your future meetings. And I appreciate your having this meeting, but again, I wish more of the board was here, and I wish more of the public was here.
Where can we find, where is it? Can we just search your name on?
Well, if you go on YouTube,
Cited
and
it here.
if you go on YouTube,
It's on the last page, the website. It's got a little website, it's a Ridgefield Record, the only paper left in town.
In Bethel. I think it's out of Bethel.
No,
No,
it's a Ridgefield.
Ridgefield Record, but ridgefieldrecord.com/pot. And it's not working on my iPad. It was working on my computer. You can also go to YouTube and just do a search on Ridgefield Cannabis, and it should come to the top. But it's about a 20-minute presentation, and some of the ECDC material is on it.
Great, yeah, let's,
So,
glad to put it together. Could I just make one comment?
Sure.
Regarding the potency? I mean, I have definitely heard that over the last 30 years, unregulated illegal marijuana has gotten much more potent. But what the dispensary, the woman from the dispensary in Massachusetts told me is that it's highly regulated and, there are professionals growing it.
The
So-
THC content.
Right, so you could say, I want very light or I want very heavy. And so you know what you're getting. If you go into a park and buy it from somebody, he can tell you whatever he wants. But these regulated places, if you say, I want a very light dose of THC, you get a very light dose of THC.
And they can do that today at the medical
Yeah.
dispensary, right?
Exactly.
Mr.
One last question, one last comment. Was it Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Morris's comments, I think are off point, because he speaks about having seen one Massachusetts dispensary that is not unsavory. I don't think the issues are relate to that. I've seen a lot of bad people conduct a beautiful, clean office and do very, very bad things. I don't think that's appearances are a proper way to logically evaluate things. I don't think that you can make a distinction if you do this. I think the town is gonna have a hard, I'll give you an example. It's a terrible example. Please forgive me for being a little rough. Suppose there was someone here who said, well, I wanna bring a prostitution house, and I wanna put it above the bookstore across the street. Let's assume, at some future time, because there are states who have legalized prostitution, or let's assume that someone can figure a way, say, hey, look, this is my body, private thing, I got a room upstairs, and I just tell people on Craigslist to show up, or whatever they use now, I don't know what they use. The point is, you'll have no defense, you'll have no logical defense to distinguish. Well, it's voluntary conduct. They're not doing anything rough, they're very savory. When you enter this realm, when you go into these type of issues, you expose the town to risks that are far beyond what you may see. And reliance upon, well, it looks okay, or many people like to do it, or many people did it in the past, I take exception to it because it doesn't rely on data. It's, as I pointed out in that survey that I cited, it was a scientific survey, a statistical survey. What one thinks a lot of people do, or one thinks a lot of people did do, or these things are not relevant to a legislative function. Your function is to sift data, sift opinions, but make a decision and legislate based on data, objective evidence for the general welfare of the town. The best passage is the passage from the Sermon on the Mount. Christ says, which among you would give a stone to your child if he asked for bread? Would there be anybody in this room would submit poison to their child, or whether a child or an adult, because at 18 I don't think much happens to a kid. Very simple. Who would poison or give something bad to a child? What person would do that? Well, it's okay, they seem they're very nice. No one would do that. You know no one would do that. And you know, everybody in their heart knows that. So therefore you have to salvage that in some legislative act of judgment. In this town, if this place goes, if this town goes, we're in trouble. This is a piece of America that's been carved out, got many faults, but this place is one of the last places in the Northeast that has the flavor of something that's gone. Maybe it didn't exist, people say it was always an illusion, I don't believe it. This, don't give it up. Don't give it up. Don't do it. It's not the right thing. No matter what younger people or kids or people that think they're educated and smart, they don't know really what they think they know. And what's bad comes in many different ways, almost always with a smiling face and a suit and tie. So I suggest, again, the arguments are fallacious and should be considered.
I'll have to stop wearing a suit and tie.
No, it's okay. We got
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
That went on today.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you,
for your
John.
time.
Good seeing you. Any further comments? There'll be additional public hearings, I said, on March 26th and April 2nd at 10 a.m. right here where we are. We'll make a much greater effort. We can have it videoed. It's a good idea that we can put on our website. Thank you. Yep.
I mean, and maybe make it live, so people can watch it live. I'm not sure we want people throwing in questions from. remote,
We
but-
can stream it, I'm not gonna zoom it.
Yeah,
We can stream it from here.
stream it meaning Comcast.
It'll
Or
be
you
streamed
just-
on our website.
Right, right.
Just log on to ridgefieldct.org, and it'll be right there, click it,
Yeah.
watch it. And it'll be archived there as well.
Yeah, that's great, great. At least let people.
Right. One of the issues, I will say, as the first selectman in town government, is that we are required to operate under federal law. And it creates a problem for us with our policy relative to not allowing, we drug test all the time, on a spot basis. And if we pass a law that implies it's okay, how do we handle and discipline that employee? Now, Lori Fernandez, our Human Resource Director, has stated that public safety, police, fire, EMS, highway CDL drivers will still be required to pass those tests and will be subject to termination if found above the limit or to have been using. That's gonna be a problem because I'm sure they'll contest it because state law allows it, et cetera, et cetera. And that's an avenue I don't wanna go down. I would hope that the state and the federal government would be in sync on this, yes or no. But
Yeah.
I've spoken with Lori about it. It creates, there's gonna be legal issues associated with this.
I totally see that, but I can't see that. I mean, if you think it's good in every other reason except for that, I mean, I think you just need to tell state.
No, I'm
employees,
just not gonna give you all my reasons one way or the other. I'm just pointing out that one of the issues with the town government is the fact that you have to operate under federal law, and federal law says it's illegal.
Mr.
And I
Mayor.
don't know why the House of Representatives haven't taken this up. They've seen it happening across the country and present a real contradiction.
I mean, it will, it'll just take years for it to happen.
Yeah. Mr. Carr?
I think on that subject, you'll find that the state statute does protect certain industries and municipalities to continue to enforce their own.
Right, that's what I was saying.
Their own
Right,
regulation.
In certain areas, but if we have a clerical position.
Right. But you do open yourself up to litigation, that's true. I don't know whether this increases it or not, but, I'm not an attorney, so.
I'm just.
But it's an issue.
Yeah, in government, we've had this discussion,
Yeah.
that's all. So we'll see everyone on the 22nd, hopefully a few more people. We'll
26th.
certainly get it out there more, we will record it. It'll be on the website. The reason we are here today, and I should say this, is that the Planning and Zoning Commission did address the issue and voted to send it back to the Board of Selectmen based on the fact that they feel it is a policy question for the town, and the Board of Selectmen is charged with the responsibility of establishing policy. Once we make a determination, and they're hoping, P&Z was hoping that it would go to a referendum to get the voice of the people heard. If it's positive, then it would go back to planning and zoning for a determination to be made relative to the location, hours of operation, etc. Am I correct with that statement, Jeffrey? If it were to fail at referendum, then it's done. It's over. But that is the course we are following here. That's why the referendum.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great day
Thank
and
you.
weekend. That'll conclude the public hearing for today at 10:39.